So welcome everybody to a new episode of Modern Immigrant. I'm so excited to be here with Paola, our Modern Immigrant today. So welcome Paola, bienvenida.
Thank you, Edo. I love the work that you do, love your podcast, and it is a complete honor to be here. Thank you for amplifying our stories, our narratives, our voices.
The honor is mine because hearing that somebody wants to share their story really makes me happy. We need to continue to share them and we need to continue to speak up about what we're feeling. So I'm excited that you had the courage to do so today. I know it's not easy.
It definitely feels courageous, I have to say.
It is a courageous act. Like, I have met immigrants that I'm like, you should come to the podcast, and they're like, I'm not ready. And that's totally okay too. So I know that sometimes we need to be on a different part of our journeys to be able to talk about them.
Yeah.
So why don't we start by hearing where and when that immigration journey started for you.
Yeah, of course. So I am originally from Colombia, from Bogota. At the age of 14, I moved to the United States with my mother and my sister via chain migration. So the three of us moved here with our green card. At the time, my father unfortunately had to stay in Colombia. And that was very difficult experiences. We had always lived, the four of us together. The separation was quite rough, especially because we did not know when we'd see him again. So that was a hard part of the experience. When we moved to the United States, we moved to New Jersey, and we were, as I mentioned before, lucky enough to have family members here. So we moved in here with my family, with my grandmother, my aunt, and my cousins. At the time, there were 9 of us in a 2-bedroom apartment.
That's a very common immigrant experience when we arrive. Mm-hmm.
Right. So that made for an interesting time. I mean, they were kind enough to, take us in and embrace us. But yeah, there were 9 people, and I think none of us were used to so many people in an enclosed space.
Right. And different ages, right? Because, like, how old was your sister?
So my sister she's 2 years younger than me.
Okay.
My cousins, one of them happens to be about 2 to 3 years older than I am.
Okay.
Another one happened to be about maybe 5 years older than I was, and another one was my age.
So many kids, different ages, different stages.
Yeah, right. Different developmental stages as well. Yeah. So
different needs.
right. But I mean, like within that, like we were so lucky to have family here. So that's kind of like the beginning of the story. I started going to high school upon my arrival here pretty soon after, which was another.
How was that? Oh my goodness. I have had conversations with immigrants that say that was one of the hardest things that they remember, like entering high school or any school like stage as an immigrant. Can you tell us, what was the hardest, or how was that experience for you?
Yeah, it was definitely a difficult experience. So I was 14 at the time, didn't speak the language. In the community where we lived, there weren't many Latinos there. So that was a little bit hard because I, came to get an education. I had always taken school very seriously, moved here, was supposed to learn in a language I didn't speak, was supposed to socialize, make friends in a language I didn't speak. So that was quite difficult, obviously, but also like culturally, the way in which, schooling, everything happens in Colombia is actually quite different, like socialization on its own.
Could you give us like an example, like for listeners that might not know, like how would that socialization occurred in Colombia versus in the US, based on your experience, of course?
Yeah, based on my experience, of course. Yeah. So in Colombia, when I was there, I was going to an all-female school. So that on its own,
right, that's another whole, yeah.
Right, you wear uniform.
Yes.
Like there's a way in which like things are a little bit easier in that sense. There's a high focus on education as well. which felt very different from my experience here, right? So there was no uniform, which meant that we had to go clothing shopping. We had to worry about what we wore to school. It was something I was not used to.
Yes.
It added a layer of complexity for me too,
Right.
especially because at that point you start to pick up on how what you wear, how you dress, who you socialize with, has a way of adding social capital to you.
Yeah, it's almost like you can tell the status, the class status easily, how much money someone has based on like the brands of the clothes that they're wearing, like the shoes. Like that's something that I do feel like in Venezuela, I also grew up with like going to uniforms and everyone was kind of like looking the same. And that made it a little easier in a certain way. Because like, okay, we're all the same, even though once you start getting into that socialization piece, you realize that we're not, but at least visually.
Right. At least visually, you don't
Mhm.
have to worry when you're in class of like what you're wearing, which I even hear that here of like people who have grown up here, you know what I mean, but grew up in poverty. Like there was a way in which like if you weren't wearing the shoes, so
Right. Yeah, you
yeah,
can pick up on that. And kids are they can be very mean and
yeah,
teenagers.
right, yeah. So that's a way in which like the experience felt quite different.
Mhm.
And again, like I think that's another piece that here when went to high school,
Mhm.
there was a way in which you started to realize again like that social capital piece, like who hung out with who. Um, it felt that there were like groups of people that you were supposed to hang out with and maybe
Mm,
some that you shouldn't hang out with.
yes.
So I think I started to pick up on that, on what it meant for me to be friends with whom. And there's something that I will always remember when I first got here, like the early 2000s movies that happened in high school would always have this token person who didn't speak the language, and that person was always made fun of in the movie. And I think I very early started to internalize that made me different, right? That there was a
Mm,
way in which like I my social capital was different than that from those who
mm.
spoke the language.
100%. Did that, I'm just like hearing you say that, and I'm just thinking about like yourself at that age. How were you processing like the fact that you were at school? You needed to also pay attention to classes. You also like, you were like navigating all the cultural and social elements, but you were also a teenager that needed to be learning from like a class. And so, how do you think that impacted you, like emotionally? Like, yeah, I'm just like, wow, that was like so rough, like navigating so many things and then going home. And at home, there was another dimension as well, I'm sure.
Yeah, another layer to navigate.
Mm-hmm.
I think at first I really leaned into school, into it felt like it was the only thing that I could control,
Yes.
making sure that I studied, making sure that I could focus on my grades, which the first year, um, I did really well in school. But after that first year, things definitely began to change in that area because I started to realize that my education wasn't as valued um, as my ability to socialize. So I
Oh, I
shifted
see.
to
Mhm.
focusing more on like, well, how can I make friends? Which again, at the time, it was quite difficult given the fact that I didn't speak the language. But I
Yeah.
shifted definitely in that sense.
Right, because then you started learning the language. So you were like, okay, now I can socialize, right? Now I feel more comfortable or not.
No,
No,
actually, no.
really.
Yeah, for me,
Mm.
it took, I want to say, like a good 5 years to actually feel comfortable speaking the language.
Thank you for saying that because I think even as immigrants going through the immigration process, I think we expect that things are going to happen way faster for
Yeah,
ourselves, and they really don't. Like,
they don't.
they really don't because, and I think in a way, normalizing that can help us and can help people listening because it's like, I don't know in what point or your immigration you might be at right now that you're listening, but like, it's okay if you haven't hit that goal or that milestone that other people maybe accomplish faster, because you really, like, again, look at all the things that were playing out in your life. Like, of course it took 5 years, it could have taken even more. So that sounds really rough.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to say that, for myself, I got here when I was 14. So I got into like maybe like that sweet spot where I could still learn the language
Sure.
easier, right? So
Yes.
and for me, like to fully feel like I feel comfortable, it took 5 years. I also want to say that for myself, like there was like a personality piece that played a role here, because I think I'm more likely, especially at that time, I was more likely to not take the risk to speak the language because it
Yes.
wasn't perfect,
Oh.
which probably impacted how
Mm-hmm.
fast it happened for me.
Totally, that feeling more introverted, maybe, like, I don't want to be, because you'd also want to be pointed out, like, at that age you want to belong and you want to be just like the rest and you don't want to stand out. So like
Yeah.
speaking was probably like the one thing that everyone would be like, oh wait, she's different.
Yeah.
Like the one more like major thing. So
Right.
what do you think helped you like overcome or survive those years? Yeah, was it like someone that you felt like really supported you throughout that process, someone at school? um or yeah, what do you think helped you get through those difficult times, at least at that time? Because I know we're gonna jump to like more present
Yeah.
times as well.
Yeah. I think like that's a difficult question to answer, and
Mm.
not because I don't find the answer, but because the answer is, I actually navigated all of that on my own,
Mm.
eventually. So about a year after my sister, my mother, and I moved to the
Mhm.
United States, my father joined us. At the time when he joined us, he came for a work related thing and stayed. So he stayed while being undocumented.
Mm.
Um, and he stayed and he began to work. So both of my parents worked very long shifts, which meant that they were less available to really like pay attention to what was happening for us. I mean,
Right,
like you're trying to
right.
like absolutely survive at that point.
Yeah.
Um, and so I have to say, and again, like I wish this wasn't the answer, but I think I had to navigate it pretty much on my own. I had some friendships which I think were helpful, for
Right.
sure.
Mhm.
But friendships that were basically on the same position as I was.
Oh,
And
really? They were
also
also immigrants. Yeah.
not right navigating the same experiences. So maybe that would be the answer, just kind of not being alone in the experience.
And that's beautiful. Yeah. And I think that so many of us can connect on that. Like just meeting, even if it's one person, can save a whole, like, yeah, just can make the whole experience a little better. Just the fact that you can be like, oh, you're going through the same, or, let's laugh about this, or let's complain together about this unfair situation. So I'm glad to hear that there was that. And I'm also glad to hear that you're being, honest in the fact that you did a lot of the work by yourself, and that shows just like that strength and resiliency within you. It's just so much work.
Thank you. Yeah,
Yes.
and some of us have to navigate it in that way
Mm-hmm.
too. I mean,
Yes.
for myself at that age, differently than my parents, but my parents were moving probably through the same process, you know what I mean?
Right. Right.
Yeah, so I
Yes.
think that could be such a common part of the
Yeah.
immigrant experience. Yeah.
How do you think things started to change throughout your immigration journey? Like, what would you say something that had really stand out throughout these years as a very specific or unique part of your life because you're an immigrant or because you have been navigating immigration?
Yeah. I feel like I can navigate things differently than my
Mm.
peers have. Um, I mean, I think there are a couple of things. One of the things that I often talk about is that I notice what can happen with some of my friends who are immigrants when compared to those who are not immigrants, is that those of us who are immigrants are more willing to take risks. I think
Yes.
so with my immigrant friends, we have this conversation. So like,
Yeah.
what do we have to lose if we take this risk? Like what do we have to lose if we take this chance?
Yes. That is such a beautiful thing to say. We're just
Yeah.
like, we got this. Like, we did it once, we can do it
Yeah.
again. Like, yes.
Yeah, for sure. that's one of them.
Yeah.
I would say also the fact that I consider myself bicultural, bilingual.
Yes.
I can navigate two spaces. I would say even three for those of us who are Latinx. Like I could navigate the space of being Colombian. I could navigate the space of being a Latina in the United States, which is like a culture of its own. And then, the cultural being an American.
Being from here as well. Yes, that's so amazing. And I know, like, in the something that really caught my attention when we first started emailing each other for this interview was that you talk about being the older daughter of an immigrant family.
Mhm.
And yeah, I just want to explore that a little bit more because you brought it up, and I'm interested in hearing how that identity that you have has, yeah, shaped or impacted you, because I know a lot of immigrants that, they were immigrant kids and then they're growing up in the US. They wear like multiple hats and tons of responsibility. So how was that for you?
Yeah, I have to say that I share that experience with the eldest children
Yes.
of immigrant families.
Yes.
I,
Where are
I
you at? Where are
right.
you? Yes.
um, I definitely to this day I would say I'm like the CEO of my family.
Yeah.
Started at age 14, 15, and it has continued until now. Um, and I've shared with you that I am in the field of mental health, and I work with individuals who are also acculturating or have experienced some acculturation issues. And
Mhm.
I find this to happen so often as well. The eldest child, especially daughters, who
Yeah.
become the CEOs of the family.
Mm.
And one of the things that I see and experience is this inability to put things down, to be like the one who always has to take care of things.
Mm.
It started then, it continues now. And so, yeah, I definitely noticed that. And
Mhm.
it's had its way of also playing like a positive role in my life, right? Because helped me, it really helped me see what my abilities are.
Wow.
Um, yeah.
Mhm.
Um, I think the fact that I had to like learn how to navigate things really early on, the fact
Mhm.
that I had to like be sometimes like the lawyer,
The
advocate,
translator.
translator, advocate
Mhm.
for my family has made it so that I have pursued a path that can help me continue to do those things.
Mm.
One of the things that it really matters to me is to empower others. And that definitely absolutely comes from that role that I've played in my family for sure.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I just wonder, like, I'm also in the field of mental health, so I'm really interested in hearing what brought you to that field, what specifically you're doing today with your work. And I always explore how your immigration or immigrations from the people I interview have impacted the decisions of the fields and the professions they pick, because I know they're not a coincidence. So.
They're not. Um, so I currently am a clinical psychologist, emphasizing in health psychology. All of my lived experiences since I arrived to the US, I think, have led me this way. As I mentioned before, uh, advocating for my family just became like natural to me, and seeing maybe other families needing that same level of advocacy
Mhm.
continue to um, drive me to pursue degree in this field. I currently work with the community of the Bronx.
Okay.
Right. So I work with the community of the Bronx, which is like a very diverse community, really wonderful community to work with. I work with asylum seekers as well.
Wow.
I think my dad's immigration experience definitely empowered me, encouraged me, um,
Yes.
drove me to care about that community.
Mm.
And so that's some of the work that I'm doing right now. As I mentioned, I do health psychology as well. I think a lot of the experiences that some of us immigrants can have a way of impacting our physical health as well. Stress, like direct line to other physical health difficulties. And
Mhm.
so that's what I'm doing right now.
That is so amazing. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you for sharing that connection between what you experience and what you're doing right now. And I can only imagine how well you can connect to those immigrants and people that you're working with that are going through that experience that might not find representation in that field or in that area when they're seeking support. Or usually you find that the support is coming from a person that has no idea what you're going through. So I know they probably feel like, yes, she gets me, she understands what I'm going through. So that's really pretty. We do talk a lot about that connection between our mental health and our physical health. Is there something that you feel like you would like to share with immigrants that might be listening, and like
Mhm.
what can they do if they're and I know this is not like necessarily like professional advice of like go do this for the person listening, but yeah, what have you seen as helpful for people to explore when they're immigrants and they want to start addressing their mental health or taking care of it?
Yeah, of course. Thank you for asking that question. I think it's so important. So one of the things that I would recommend or, encourage you to explore is actually processing your immigration
Mm.
experience. I think that part can be so helpful for so many of us.
Yeah.
In my experience, both like as a mental health provider, but also in my own experience, one of the things that
Mhm.
I've noticed is that when you move from your country to the US or any other country for that matter, I think there's a way in which you have to be in autopilot to be able to survive. That piece of being in survival mode can be so real for so many of us, whether we are adult or children, I think.
Yes.
And so making this space to kind of make sense of your immigration experience, of the ways in which like it has impacted you can be very important. I
Yes.
know that I have made my own space in therapy for that. Um, and I shared with you that I sometimes can become very emotional in talking about this. And it's because I realize that there's a lot there for me, that doesn't go away just with time, because if anything, for so many of us, it just like continues to layer. When we come from a different country, especially if historically, if we're coming because we are trying to improve our situation, again, like we come to this country and just like hit the ground running. And what can happen for so many of us is that we don't get off the rat race until like our health or something tells us like you need to slow down.
You need to, yes. Hmm.
And so I would say like making the space to process the experience, find community, people who may have had similar histories or who understand your history. For
Yes.
me, finding friends who have made the time to process their own experiences has been really helpful because we've been able to sit down and I've been able to sit down with them and like really talk about like what comes up for me. And they've
Mm-hmm.
been able to kind of name some things for me that have helped me get off the rat race, one. And also like they've pointed out to me how I've been in survival mode for whatever many years.
And even the fact like the fact that you're feeling emotional, or that, as you mentioned before we started recording, like I get emotional when I'm talking about this, to me that says a lot about how much you have been processing it. Because I think when we haven't processed our trauma or our immigration journeys, um we get numb and we shut down and we might not even cry, right? We're just like, I'm fine, I'm doing good, this is just not. And to me, when I see that reaction, I say, well, this person is not even close to being able to open up or explore it. So it shows how much work you have done too with yourself, either in therapy or in other ways, or talking to your friends, because you're getting to that point of saying, yeah, this is how I feel, maybe I need to cry, maybe, but you're feeling it, right? Like that's already like you're hitting another stage in that journey. So I think I would encourage people to connect to those feelings and really allow them to exist. Like, I'm feeling sad, like we don't get the opportunity to feel sad when we're in survival mode. And when I look back at like my worst years as an immigrant, I couldn't even talk about it, right? And if you would have asked me, I would have been like, oh, everything is fine. Like, no problem. I decided to come here. No issues with the fact that I can't go back home. And it's like, no, now when I do talk about it, it's like, wow, that was so terrible and so difficult. And I even feel like a little sad for that Beto that had to, push those feelings down.
Mhm.
Um, so I
Yeah.
I really resonate with that.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and it's survival, right? Like
Mm.
it works. It works for us to not come in contact with
Yes.
them. Because imagine if we did.
Right. No, exactly. It's serving a purpose at a time and at a period. Um,
Yeah.
I also would like to ask you, and I know we have like 10 more minutes or so, but I do feel really interested in asking you, what was your, like, when you think about sharing your immigration journey in a space like this, and I know it's too short of a time in an interview to go through all of the things, what is something that you would like to share in this space? Something that you feel like has really shaped your immigration, impacted it, or that you feel like other people would benefit from listening, or maybe that first thought that you had when you said, I do want to share my story in Modern Immigrant.
Yeah. I think it felt important for me to reach out to you and to kind of like accept that, being vulnerable about this could be helpful to someone else. That part, it feels very important. I shared it with you at the beginning. I think hearing more of our stories can help us see ourselves in someone else, and that seeing ourselves in someone else can really help us think about how we might want to get to the spaces that other people have gotten to.
Yes, it can even inspire, right?
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah, to me that piece feels important, right? Like when 14-year-old Paola got here, I never thought I'd become a doctor. You know what I mean? Like was the hope there? Of course, but I don't think I was seeing myself in spaces to say I could do that. And I think the more we see ourselves in others, the more we believe we can actually be there. You know what I mean?
Oh, that is so beautiful. It's true.
Mhm.
It's opens up an opportunity.
Yeah, yeah. In
Mm,
that I also want to acknowledge that sometimes like getting to the spaces can be very difficult.
mm,
It took me, so I knew I wanted to become a doctor in psychology from the time I graduated high school,
mm,
but my road here looks very different than that of people who grew up here. Um, I, from ages 15 to about 17, I worked in the same like packing factory that my parents did, right?
mm,
When I finished high school, I had to wait for a while to actually, well, I went to undergrad, and after
mhm,
undergrad, I had to go into work. I couldn't
mhm,
just say like, okay, from undergrad, I'll go to graduate school. I had to go into the field, the workforce rather, because
mm.
I needed to save money or I needed to pay for things. And it took me a while to actually apply for graduate school. And so my road here has looked different, and like my encouragement for the people who are listening to us is that your road to spaces might look different, might feel different, uh, might just be very different than the people that have had the opportunities, right? But it doesn't mean that we can make our own road there. It's just, it looks a little different, that's
It
all.
just looks a little different, and that makes us who we are, and that makes that authenticity, and back to the point of like, now you're able to help people that are going through similar experiences. Like, that makes such a unique um experience for you to be able to reach others. And if you didn't go through all of those ups and downs, or if you
Mhm.
didn't have to take those breaks before going to what you wanted, the impact right now would be different. The impact in
Oh,
your work would be completely different, and it would be valid and okay and helpful for a lot, but it
mhm.
just wouldn't be the same. It really wouldn't. So, and maybe you wouldn't be here talking about it, right? Like, you wouldn't be talking about your immigration journey because maybe you didn't hit any bumps in the road. So I think it's just really pretty to hear that and to understand that it's okay if things don't look as perfect, or as sometimes we also just hear like maybe somebody like at the beginning of the interview would have heard that you're now a doctor in psychology and you're doing this work, and they would have been like, oh, it was probably so easy for her, right? And now that we're getting to actually hear your story, we're like, oh, okay, so maybe I can do that too. Because I'm also right now having to just work, and I couldn't apply to my master's right away. So like whenever you open up that question and that opportunity for people to share their stories, you really realize that nobody had it easy, really. Like we just see like a one dimension face. But it's complicated. It's complicated, but it's possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it definitely has felt complicated, but yeah, here I
Here you
am.
are. I'm so proud of all the things you have been able to accomplish. I'm really honored to have the opportunity to have met you and have you on the podcast. I feel like this conversation is going to help a lot of people. Maybe they can start feeling inspired or motivated to go for that career they feel like they put aside, or they think, they don't find representation there. I think like maybe revisit that idea.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely would
Any
encourage that.
Yeah, yes. Awesome. I don't know if there's anything else you want to share before we say goodbye. Again, so grateful that you are here.
Yeah, of course. No, I mean, again, just very grateful for the work that you're doing. Thank you for highlighting our voices. It's really wonderful to learn from people who have had some similar like experiences to the ones that I've had. And
Yes,
like this is what I mean by community too. Just hearing our
exactly.
own stories can be really wonderful.
Thank you so much, Paola. Again, it was an honor to have you on the show.
Thank you, an honor to meet you. Thank you for the work that you do.
Oh, thank you.